All right, I'm going to hit it off. My name is Stephen Granzella. I'm with Merrick Health. I just want to thank everybody that's joined us here this evening. It's part of the perks of working with Merrick. We are very much focused on optimizing your health, and we like to associate with the leading experts in our industry. And so I have the pleasure of having Sam Miller on today. Sam and I have met about a year ago, and in a great opportunity that we had, and it was been great to communicate with you over the past year, working together. We are very fortunate to actually have a handful of your students that are health coaches here at Merrick and have done presentations on your work. So really happy for you to jump on, do a presentation. After Sam does a little intro of himself, he'll do a amazing presentation on the topic at hand, and then we're going to jump into some questions and answers. So please be sure to, as things come up, please be sure to drop the questions in the Q&A, and we'll be addressing them at about the last 15 minutes of the call. But no further ado, here you go, Sam.
Perfect, Stephen. I appreciate it, man. I'm going to get my screen share going for you guys. I'll do a little bit of an additional introduction, kind of frame our talk today, a little bit more about me so you know more about my background. And we'll really talk about how today's topic can kind of fit in with the work that you're doing at Merrick and just within your own health and fitness journey as a whole. Get my full screen share going. I'm also going to take the headphones off. If at any point you guys can't hear me perfectly, just pop in the chat box for Q&A, but we should be good audio wise. And you should be able to see full screen of my slides here for today's topic. So one of the reasons we're talking about sleep hormones and fat loss is this is obviously interconnected with a health optimization journey. So anytime you're talking about, sleep, it goes hand in hand with things like recovery, exercise performance. We have fat loss here. A lot of people have body recomposition goals. And if we're not sleeping optimally, it's going to impact our results and just how we feel, our quality of life, and a term that we'll talk about today called biofeedback. So one cool thing about sleep is if you actually look at sleep research and the folks who really get in the trenches of studying sleep, is evolutionary anthropologists and sleep scientists actually question, did we actually evolve from a state of sleep or wakefulness? And we spend so much time in our life, we actually spend years sleeping, kind of begs the question, why would the body spend so much time in such a vulnerable state? Because thousands of years ago, we may not have been in the comforts of our homes and have roofs over our heads. So the fact that we were literally exposing ourselves in this vulnerable state of being not fully conscious, not fully alert, just shows how important it is for us to continue, living optimally and really be able to, recover and function on a daily basis. And if you see the diagram in the corner here, what you'll notice is we talk about how sleep is more than shut-eye. So it's important for healthy hormones. A lot of you guys probably found Merrick through a hormone optimization journey. It's important for circadian rhythm, mental clarity, and it also modulates inflammation, which is a huge buzzword in the health and fitness industry. We'll talk a little bit more about inflammation today and why sleep is so important for that. So there's, parts of sleep, especially when we go through deep sleep in various stages where we're almost in a state that's kind of comparable to paralysis in a way. And so the fact that as humans, we've evolved to continue to have this be such an important part of our life, we're literally spending hours, probably a third of, our days sleeping, is pretty crazy. And so we'll talk a little bit about the importance, how to optimize your sleep, how to prioritize your sleep, and a few key tools that you can pay attention to in your journey, whether it's with your Merrick PCC or things that you're doing on your own as well. So a little bit more about me. I don't like to spend a ton of time on this. I like to really focus on the presentation and let the topic kind of speak for itself. But for those of you who are less familiar with my background, I started off in the health and fitness industry as a coach, first and foremost. So personal training, nutrition coaching, health and wellness coaching, and later evolved into writing a book called Metabolism Made Simple, which was an Amazon bestselling book in 2022, and have mentored coaches around the globe. So everywhere from United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Mexico, South America, Europe, Middle East, South Africa, kind of just really cool to be able to reach a lot of other health professionals and even have some folks now who are working hand in hand with Merrick and helping you guys in basically your health optimization journey, whether it's bioidentical hormone replacement, supplementation, lab reviews, lots of really, really cool stuff. And that's the type of stuff that I really enjoy and geek out on. And I think it's things that are commonly missed in the conventional health and fitness industry. As far as other work that I've done with companies you might recognize, I've done some keynote talks for companies like LinkedIn in New York City and been a contributor in more of a written fashion for a number of different publications within the fitness industry as well. And what's kind of cool about this information and just kind of being in the trenches of the health, fitness, nutrition space and health optimization space is a lot of this information continues to evolve and grow. And so we'll talk a little bit about the philosophy behind some of the stuff I'm teaching today, some of the research behind what I'm teaching today, but I didn't leave the womb with this information. I kind of make that joke. It's not like my mom had me and all of a sudden I was just talking about sleep hormones and fat loss. So I want this to be tangible for you, practical for you, and just help you accumulate the knowledge that you need to actually like translate this into action, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish in your life today. So today's main focus, we're going to talk a little bit about physiology, which is basically our internal health and how sleep impacts our internal health. That impact on our internal health will subsequently impact things like muscle building and fat loss. We'll talk about research around muscle building and fat loss, even the impact of sleep and mental health, also sleep and inflammation. And we'll talk about some signs and symptoms of, poor quality sleep. And then for practical application, we're going to move into 5 areas of focus. These are things you need to be paying attention to if you are trying to get the best sleep possible, recover, as hard as possible to be able to go and train intensely or have an optimal body composition, really whatever it is that your goal is, whether it's performance minded or otherwise. The big picture, so I'm going to share some different diagrams with you. I'm going to share some research excerpts, different photos, things we're going to walk through. So if you're a visual learner and you enjoy kind of being able to have like pictures to go through, we've got some stuff for that. If you enjoy more kind of text bullet points and lists, I have a little bit on that. If you're an auditory learner, hopefully you'll be able to listen as we're going through, whether you're watching this on the computer, kind of listening as you're cooking dinner or something like that. If you're on the East Coast like me, it's a little bit later right now. So as far as moving through today's presentation, we're going to talk about the impact of sleep on blood sugar regulation, because that element of glycemic control is very important for anyone who's dieting or trying to improve their physique. There's an impact on our hunger hormone, ghrelin, our reproductive hormones. This is going to be things like testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen. So for men, this will impact your testosterone optimization journey. For women, this is going to impact progesterone in terms of having healthy ovulation, as well as the balance between estrogen and progesterone, and also female testosterone levels, which are very important for any body composition goal. And then we'll talk a little bit about how it may impact our decision-making and our health behaviors. And also just when we're tired, it's kind of common sense. You don't really need research to know this, but if you had a day where you didn't get a great night's sleep, it's hard to go to the gym and set a PR. It's hard to get those extra steps in if you're trying to, Stan Efferdine has done some presentations with Merrick. If you guys have attended those talks, you'll know he talks a lot about going for a post-meal walk or going for a walk in the morning, getting sunlight, things like that. And when we're tired, when we're feeling fatigued, it's very hard to do the things we know we're supposed to do, because we tend to shift more towards a behavior of conserving energy, of getting more sleep in the future, which, it's kind of those are diametrically opposed, right? Being very active, being on our feet is very different than sitting on the couch, feeling tired and catching up on that rest. This is one of my favorite diagrams when it comes to sleep and understanding the importance of sleep. There's some big words on here, so I'm going to break it down in just a more digestible fashion. I'll also use a little highlighter to describe what I'm talking about and how it might affect the average person in their health and fitness goals. So even though we are talking, use a little bit of Merrick red here. So even though we are talking a lot about hormones and fat loss today, one of the important things to remember is part of the influence of that sleep loss on our health journey is that it can impact the decisions we make. So things like our food choices, our exercise choices, and that's kind of central here because that plays a role in terms of everything that's going on in terms of what we're talking about. So if nothing else, we need to remember that sleep, it's common sense whether you've had maybe an altercation with a friend, or you don't react to your spouse or your partner at home the best way possible, or maybe you make a decision at work that you regret later on, or an email that maybe you probably shouldn't have sent, or you should have read it over one more time. Sleep impacts all of these different things, and those micro decisions add up, and that's sort of a compounding effect in our transformation. So when you think about things like what you're going to have for a snack, or what you're going to eat for breakfast, lunch, or reaching for that extra food after dinner, decreasing sleep quality directly impacts those decisions. And we'll highlight some research that supports that here in a little bit. So first and foremost, even if you're not interested in the super complex science, you just want very basic, impact as to why is this important for us to talk about, is we tend to see altered food choices, and we tend to see deviations towards where we're exceeding, our calorie intake, as far as food choices that may be hyper palatable, meaning it's very easy to gravitate towards those foods. So maybe those snack foods are things that are less micronutrient dense and maybe higher in calories. In addition to this basic sort of change in our decision making, we have, really more what the title of the presentation indicates, which is how hormones may impact our fat loss pursuits in our body composition. So I'm going to start over here on the left side. We'll kind of go left to right in terms of why this might actually be important. But first, we have insulin sensitivity, decreased glucose tolerance, and insufficient beta cell compensation. Lots of really big words. I like to think of insulin sensitivity as our receptivity to food, so calories, carbohydrates, and really what we see is when we have impaired insulin sensitivity, or a term known as insulin resistance, this will impact not only our long-term health, but in the short term, it impacts nutrient partitioning, which is what are we really doing with the food that we're eating? So sleep, even in short-term acute sleep loss, we see changes in fasted blood glucose, A1C, fasting insulin. So if you are someone who's, let's say you're reviewing your labs, or it's something you monitor periodically on your health and fitness journey, all things being relatively equal, if we're seeing changes in sleep, not only is it potentially driving these altered food choices, but in that acute and long-term sleep deprivation, we will see changes in measures of fasting insulin, fasted blood glucose, and A1C. This may be to varying degrees depending on the person and depending on the sleep loss, but those are a few key markers to pay attention to. So I'm going to kind of write this over here for you guys who are maybe tracking at home, or maybe you have some labs that you would look at yourself. And I'll move this box over a little bit too. Fasting insulin. This is one marker. I just have it on two lines. And then we have fasted, I'll just put FBG for fasted blood glucose. There are other more complex markers you can look at, like C-peptide or glycomark, in terms of insulin function and insulin sensitivity, glycemic regulation and control. But these are probably three main ones that are going to exist on most of your Merrick panels, and things that you are drawing. And you can always seek out additional testing. And these are serum labs, and typically you're going to be going to a facility like LabCorp to have that done. Blood glucose, you can use a glucometer or continuous glucose monitor, and we would potentially look at fasted blood glucose or postprandial glucose, which is what our glucose is doing after a meal. So where this shows up as far as our health and fitness journey is we want to be able to appropriately use calories and carbohydrates towards fueling exercise performance, fueling recovery, and making sure that we're essentially storing that carbohydrate as glycogen to use for future workouts. Carbohydrates can be incredibly beneficial in that they're anti-catabolic, meaning they help to prevent the breakdown of muscle tissue, and they're going to support recovery and also help us meet our overall calorie needs. If you're consuming carbohydrates from things like fruits, which you may have heard Stan or potentially Derek talk about in the past, this is going to contain a whole food matrix of nutrients, things like vitamins and minerals that are also going to contribute to your overall health. As far as additional things we want to consider, I'm going to clear my drawings real quick and move here to the middle of the board. So we have increased ghrelin and decreased leptin. So leptin is a medium to long-term basically influencer of metabolism, and it does play a role in terms of satiety and also what's going on in terms of our metabolism as a whole. Ghrelin is basically a driver of appetite. So ghrelin will sort of increase your likelihood to eat, in the sense that is that physical sensation part of our our body's desire and drive to consume calories. So when we have poor sleep or sleep restriction and sleep loss, that's impacting what's happening in terms of this aspect of our metabolism. If we then consume more food, that's going to impact our body composition. So this plays a role in terms of what's happening in terms of our daily dietary decision making. And, we also see decreased physical activity over here too. So this can be kind of a recipe for disaster for some folks, because they will outconsume sort of their caloric allowance of food that allows them to maintain their weight, and they have decreased physical activity, which is essentially contributing to that energy expenditure. So when you have those things that are mismatched, that's where some people see negative changes in their body composition, or they're gaining body fat when in reality they want to actually be losing body fat, or maybe they're staying the same and not making as much progress as they want. So by optimizing our sleep, the way I want you to see some of these negative arrows that we're looking at here, right? When we have this stuff across the board, regardless of, the big words or terms or scientific terminology and research we're going to go through today, sleep helps you get off of this very vicious cycle and hamster wheel that impacts your health and fitness journey. So if you're trying to have optimal hormones, if you're trying to have optimal body composition, sleep is a key lever there. And a lot of times we pay attention to our exercise, we pay attention to our nutrition, but if we're missing sleep, sleep is like a supercharger for results when it comes to everything else that we're doing. It takes every ounce of effort that you're putting forth when you're awake and helps to optimize that through supporting recovery, through supporting energy levels, through supporting hormonal function. We'll talk a little bit more about thyroid hormone and testosterone on the next couple slides. Also important for modulating inflammation in our immune system. So if you ever hear folks talk about, gastrointestinal health, gut health, the microbiome, inflammation, everything like that, sleep plays a very important role in terms of optimizing health in those systems. So I'm going to clear kind of this middle section here just so we're not too crowded and congested. And I do want to briefly touch on how decreased sleep quality, there's a vicious cycle between some of these factors down here and what's going on at the top. So if someone is potentially overweight or obese, this increases risk factors for sleep apnea. This can happen in heavily muscled folks as well. So think of a heavyweight bodybuilder or someone who has increased weight and size just overall on their frame. And when we combine that sleep loss with some of the changes we're seeing in terms of insulin sensitivity and inflammation, this has a compounding effect along with an increase in blood pressure. And also what we're seeing in terms of what's referred to as sympathovagal balance. So if you've ever heard of the vagus nerve or vagal tone, that's really what that's speaking to, is so the kind of a combination of the HPA axis and gut-brain connection, vagus nerve. And then what we're seeing with blood pressure is oftentimes when we have this decreased sleep quality, it's impacting cortisol. We're seeing blood pressure elevations. Then oftentimes people rely on more caffeine, which can actually increase blood pressure further. And then if we have any of this other stuff going on, it can start to, once again, be kind of this hamster wheel. And we'll parse out specific details of all of this. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a big picture first. And then I have 10 specific bullet points from the research that are your most important takeaways about sleep and why it's necessary to supercharge your results. And then we'll move into our 5 practical applications tools, really focusing just on what is the big picture. What do Sam, what do I need to be doing in my day-to-day life? Kind of regardless of your stance on the science or how you want to apply that. Some of you guys may be in a health profession yourself and find this as something you can talk about with the people that you work with as well. So really this bottom part is just speaking to increased risk factors for chronic disease, increased risk factor for diabetes. Here, we'd largely be talking about type 2 diabetes because of the progression in terms of poor metabolic health and insulin resistance. And there's a strong interplay between obesity and diabetes, and then also cardiovascular diseases as well. So let's kind of go to more of the written layout as far as key takeaways we want to have. I'm just going to kind of read through the key points. I've tried to translate this in a way that it's less sort of research jargon and more applicable for the everyday individual. I've highlighted in bold really your key takeaways and what I think is most important. I'm really not a fan of having huge paragraphs of text on a page, but I do want to move through these as far as just key points and bullet points and kind of bolded facts that we want to pay attention to. So even if we just kind of skim these, right, we're seeing things about hampering fat loss, muscle atrophy, raising ghrelin, altering eating habits. That's kind of the pattern we want to be seeing, is how is this impacting our metabolic health or physiological status quo? And how is this impacting the decisions we make on a daily basis in terms of our health journey? So our first key point is, even if a calorie deficit is maintained, and now a calorie deficit is where we are eating less calories than our energy maintenance needs. So basically we're taking in less food than we're burning. And if we're in a calorie deficit and it's maintained, meaning we stick with that and we're trying to adhere to that deficit, despite the increased hunger that occurs from sleep loss and the cravings that will occur, that's referring to sort of our hedonic and homeostatic eating systems, a greater proportion of that weight lost. So if you're seeing your scale weight drop, it's coming from muscle and not fat in terms of percentage, right? We're seeing a little bit more muscle loss in terms of fat. Now, our goal, if we're trying to improve our body comp, look as good as possible, feel as good as possible, we really would prefer to lose more fat relative to muscle, and we need sleep to do that. I have these little PubMed IDs next to this. So if you see those little numbers and you're kind of wondering what's going on, that's just in reference to the study that I'm referring to, so that you know that this is essentially pulled from research and evidence, as opposed to being my personal opinion on these sort of key facts about sleep. Number two is the cortisol raise that's associated with sleep restriction directly hampers fat loss and muscle building capabilities, causing muscle atrophy and increased fat storage, especially in the abdominal area. So many people, when they work to improve their health and fitness, there's so many folks who want to lose belly fat, or they want to be more toned, or they want to build muscle and have abs. So we're not doing ourselves any favors when we're missing out on sleep in terms of those trouble spots that people refer to. Now, this shouldn't be advertised in any way as spot reduction or anything like that. The evidence doesn't really support that. It just means that we're sort of disproportionately maybe increasing fat storage in a less favorable way. And it tends to be in an area of the body that people are sensitive to. And so the more we can optimize sleep, we're really helping with that. And sleep, because it's so important for our circadian rhythm and what goes on with the hormone cortisol, by sleeping more, it may help to offset or basically mitigate cortisol-induced insulin resistance, which is really what I was kind of speaking to a little bit on that past diagram as well. As far as our third key point, sleep restriction raises ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone that stimulates appetite, and decreases leptin, which is a long-term satiety hormone. It's actually medium and long-term, but this particular study is referring more towards its long-term satiety effects. Number four, sleep restriction raises cortisol. Lots of you guys have probably heard infomercials or social media influencers talking about cortisol as a stress hormone. Sleep restriction is going to raise cortisol, and it can potentially alter eating habits towards hyperpalatable foods. Now, I have seen, as far as in clinical practice and anecdotally and working as a practitioner in the space, when we have that increase in cortisol, some clients tend to eat a bit more. Some people tend to eat a little bit less when they're actually quite stressed. But then when they do eat, their choice of food may be slightly different, or it's impacting what's going on from a nutrient density perspective, potentially. Number five is chronic sleep restriction can make someone who's normally cautious and reflective in decision-making more impulsive and prone to risk-taking. So I don't know if you guys have like a super conservative family member or someone who's just super mellow through and through. Maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's a cousin or an uncle or something like that. But imagine your most conservative relative going to like the extreme end of the spectrum. They're going off the rails in Vegas. That's not something that's necessarily going to happen overnight, but we can certainly become a less optimal version of ourselves when we're missing out on sleep. Those are the days when, like I was referring to, the email or the text message that maybe just wasn't what it needed to be, the conversation with a partner or spouse that maybe was a little bit off of our normal tune. Maybe we were talking to a friend and weren't receiving things as well as maybe we should have. So we know that it can impact things like decision-making, risk-taking. Even you can look at research around daylight savings and the increase in things like car accidents and stuff. It does impact what's going on in terms of decision-making, behaviors, alertness, really across the board. It's just impacting us in terms of human health. We're going to hit 5 more key facts, and then we're going to move into more of the practical takeaways, a little bit more visual part of the presentation, and speaking more towards my experiences. And then we'll shift to open it up for questions. We're just under halfway right now. So I'll be sure to leave time for questions for you guys. We're going to roll through those 5 key points, move into practical takeaways, and then I do see that there are some questions in the Q&A box, and I'll be sure to save some time for those as we're wrapping up today. So as far as 5 more key points to round us out at our 10 really cool facts about sleep and sleep loss or sleep restriction. Sleep restriction not only elevates cortisol, but also elevates cortisol response to future stressful events. So this is where, sleep combined with resistance training is really cool. If you actually optimize your sleep and you're someone who strength trains, it helps to buffer and make you more resilient to future stressors, which I don't know about you guys, but most of the folks that I've either worked with over the years or the other people I talk to in the space, like we all have some form of stress in our lives. We're not completely wiping that out entirely. No one comes in with the Men in Black neuralizer like Will Smith in those movies and just like wipes the stress out of our life. So we need to be able to have keystone habits in our lives that help to buffer against those stressful events. And sleep is one of those things that helps to make us more resilient to future stressors, which is actually a really important part of body transformation and losing fat or building muscle. Because if we're constantly emotionally reactive, if we struggle with emotional regulation, that impacts our decision-making, things like going to the gym, making those healthy choices, buying healthy foods, putting the right things in our body, getting to bed on time. So we really need this as a tool to help us show up as our best selves each and every day, which spills over into so many elements of our health behaviors. Second key point on this slide, and I guess we've got 4 more, and then we'll round ourselves out at our 10 key facts. Sleep restriction may subconsciously organize behaviors and tendencies towards ensuring better sleep later. So this was another really cool study. Basically, it's impacting the way that we maybe engage in activities we normally do and love or enjoy. So if you're sleep restricted and you're tired, it makes sense. Like if you're taking a nap on the couch, that is displacing a healthy activity, whether that would have been going outside for a walk with your dog or going to the gym, prepping your meals. Sleep restriction is going to spill over into some of those behaviors. Some people do a better job than others of sticking with things even when they've lost sleep. But as far as what the research and evidence seems to support is that we may shift our behavior ever so slightly to favor more sleep in the future when we have a sleep deficit in the short term. Number 3 here is going to be chronic sleep restriction may be a large factor in the pathogenesis of mood disorders. It can also impact our motivation. And motivation is one of those things that can be very fleeting in a health and fitness journey. And, as we're working to develop these important habits in our daily lives. So not only do we want optimal mood just to feel our best, but if we're constantly at a deficit in terms of sleep, it will impact things like our motivation, mood, and even potentially depressive symptoms, which we need as much help as we can get in that department when it comes to mood, motivation, mental health, doing the things we know that we should be doing that are best for us and taking care of ourselves. Number 4 is chronically elevated cortisol can also cause an inactive form of thyroid hormone to dominate. This is what I was referencing on the diagram slide and is one of our second to last research point for the day as we move into the practical tools. So with thyroid hormone, and you may have seen this in some of your labs, even coming into Merrick, if you look at a full thyroid panel that contains TSH, T4, and T3, we have to convert T4 thyroxine into T3. And during that process, there's an enzyme that makes that conversion possible. It's called deiodinase, and it pulls an iodine off of the T4 to make a T3. When we have chronically elevated cortisol, which is something that's very common in a state of sleep deprivation, this can cause an inactive form of thyroid to dominate, which is called reverse T3, leading to functionally lower thyroid levels. So reverse T3 is like the doppelganger. It would almost be, I use a teaching example for my students where I don't know if any of you guys happen to grow up in the 90s and 2000s, but as far as pop culture goes, this example should be pretty clear cut and straightforward. I can use another one if you need it. So obviously in the 2000s, Eminem, Marshall Mathers was super popular, and he had a song called The Real Slim Shady. And there were a bunch of imitators that acted like him, they walk like him, they talk like him, but they're not quite him. And that's kind of like reverse T3. It kind of looks like it would be Eminem. It kind of looks like it would be The Real Slim Shady, but it's actually not. And it doesn't have the same metabolic benefits as free T3. So when we're inflamed, when we're chronically dieting, when we have poor sleep or poor gut health, this impacts deiodinase, which converts that T4 to T3. And we really want to see those healthy free T3 levels on our serum labs. So that's something you can certainly talk about if you're having labs done or if you're working with a patient care coordinator at Merrick. And it's very important in order to lose that body fat, but also maintain healthy energy levels and just have really an optimized metabolism overall. Our last point from the research before moving into practical application is it lowers testosterone. And a lot of you guys probably came to Merrick or heard of Merrick because of hormone optimization, and testosterone is kind of known as that chief anabolic hormone. And it is important in terms of muscle accrual, but also helps to thwart the accumulation of body fat. It's actually very important from both perspectives, and that's for both men and women. This is not just, I know some people associate testosterone as like a macho hormone. Fortunately, if you guys work with Merrick, you've probably received some great education around testosterone and the importance in both men and women. And so here, what we need to understand is if we're constantly at a sleep deficit, that's going to be impacted. I will say that bioidentical hormone replacement does help to offset this a little bit because you have a bit more of a steady stream of that hormone coming in, but we still want to consider optimizing sleep for all these other benefits in addition to just the reproductive hormone aspect. And for women, this is also still going to be very important too. But speaking mostly to endogenous hormone production here, which means what are the hormones that we're making naturally if we were not taking a prescription compound like a testosterone or something like that. And even if you are taking testosterone, we want to get good sleep so that we remember our health behaviors. Like if we have a prescription for testosterone, we need to remember to take it. We need to remember to do all these other things that are important for staying healthy and engaging, in all the stuff that we know we should be doing anyways. As far as sleep optimization and moving into practical application, I have 5 parts or 5 tools that we're going to talk about in terms of sleep optimization and ways to kind of look at the big picture of sleep hormones and fat loss. Because some of you guys, you're probably like, tell me what to do. I don't necessarily need the research. Other folks like to kind of geek out on the research, and then it helps them understand the why behind what they're doing. If you guys are like me, you may like to know how the clock works in addition to just being told what time it is. So that's why I like to include that background information. I think it can help us understand why we're doing what we're doing. So part 1 is temperature. If we are, and right now, if you're listening to this in the US and Canada, it is summertime. If you're in New Zealand or Australia, for any reason, I know most Merrick clients are in the United States. So if you have any guests here, or I know there are some Merrick team members who happen to be across the pond. So temperature, very, very important in terms of sleep regulation, staying cool. So we want a cool, dark room. So we're going to talk a little bit about temperature. We're going to talk about light. We'll talk about a little on nutrition, talk a little bit about supplementation. And with temperature, there's a couple things we can look at here. One is just the room temperature that we have overall, but some people, especially I would say if we're moving into like perimenopause or any sort of women's health considerations as we move through the lifespan, doing some contrast hydrotherapy, things like cold exposure can help, or heat exposure, contrast in that way. But typically what we would want to do is actually end on warm so that the body begins to engage the appropriate negative feedback to cool us back down. I think you can achieve adequate sleep without necessarily engaging in anything like that. You can also do things earlier in the day that are going to set you up for sleep. We're going to talk more about that later. But some folks find that just something like a hot bath or shower can be helpful. I would space it out a little bit. If you like to do it right before sleep, that's okay. I do have some friends and former clients who kind of found what worked best for them and they applied it. So I want you to take these tools and do what's best for you. There is an individual response to some of these things, but the biggest thing is going to be your room temperature. We'll talk about light, mainly getting morning sunlight, but we do want a cool, dark room. This may involve making sure you have the appropriate sheets on your bed, not having super heavy clothing or anything like that, or sleeping in the nude. And, this is just a generic thermostat photo, but you need to do what's best for you in terms of you want to be cold enough to stay cool throughout the night where you're not hot or sweating, but you also don't want it so cold that you're shivering and waking up. So it's that tolerable temperature where you're staying very cool, but you are not so cold that it inhibits you from actually or prohibits you from actually sleeping. So that's my first thing. One other way to think about temperature is light exposure and cold exposure earlier in the day. can be a helpful way to start your day, which then may set you up for success later. We always want to be thinking about how early day decisions set us up for success later in the day, whether that's packing, a healthy lunch to bring to work, or simply getting some sunlight to set us up for success in terms of our sleep at night. I like to use temperature here. The way that I personally apply this in my own life is keeping, the house a little bit cooler in the evening. And then earlier in the day, we're going to talk about light exposure here in a little bit, but I do like to kind of start the day off with a little bit of cold exposure. And I have found that some folks enjoy more of a contrast hydrotherapy later in the day. It's not something I personally apply, but some people do enjoy that if that's the only time they can kind of fit that in. 2, light exposure. So this looks like a great place for a picnic or something. No, not really sure where this is, but the reason we're looking at this picture is sunlight or light exposure. Ideally, we want to do this in the first part of our day, getting outside in the morning. If for whatever reason you've got to drop the kids off at school or you're a little bit limited, understand that light exposure through a window or being in a car is not going to be the same as getting outside and going for a walk. Even on a cloudy day, even if it's not a clear blue sky like this picture, we still want to try to get sunlight. This is exposing our eyes to the sunlight. You don't need to look directly at the sun, just simply get outside, and whether it's looking at nature or even if you're in more of a city environment, just getting outside, going for a walk can be really, really helpful. This has a number of different benefits, but the light exposure does help in terms of anchoring a healthy circadian rhythm, which is our biological clock. So I know it seems counterintuitive because a lot of people think about sleep in terms of what is my bedtime routine, but actually, what we do in the morning, and even things like we're going to talk about in part 3, 4, and 5, even what we're doing in the afternoon can impact our sleep and what's happening at night. So our first 2 here, we have temperature and we have light exposure. So with light exposure, ideally get some on your skin as well, but we want to go outside without sunglasses. And once again, we're just kind of walking, gaze at a distance. You don't need to look towards the sun. You just need to actually be outside. You could sit and read outside. If you have a pet or someone in your household you want to go for a walk with, that's great. I have dogs, so personally I usually take the dogs out, spend some time outside with them. Usually it's not the longest thing in the world, but I do enough to where I get a little bit of outside time, and then I'm going to start working. Or maybe I need to read or plan my day or something, but I try to do that outside if I can. If you have a deck or something like that where you can see outside, that can be great as well. Just remember, windows are going to impact the efficacy of what's going on here. Part 3 is going to be meal timing. This is fairly individual because there's research to support, eating. If you eat a little bit closer to bed, carbohydrates and things like that can actually improve sleep latency, which is the time, it decreases the time to fall asleep. But the problem with eating closer to bed is it can impact the sleep architecture. So you may fall asleep faster, but it doesn't mean that the overall quality of sleep is right where we need it to be. So you may need to play with this to figure out the right balance of not cutting off your eating so early that it impacts your time to fall asleep. But also we don't want to eat so late that it impacts sleep architecture, slow wave sleep or deep sleep, and what's going on in terms of our overall quality of sleep. So think of that like waking up feeling well rested and we get a good night's rest, not just time in bed, but actually what's happening while we are, head hits the pillow and you're out for the night. I will say in the sort of bonus tool we're going to talk about with supplements, meal timing will also be impacted if you are utilizing any peptide therapies. So if you are working with your physician and patient care coordinator and you are using any type of growth hormone releasing peptide or combination, so think of things like tesamorelin, ipamorelin, or your CJC 1295, Modular F, any of those things, especially those paired together. Typically, you're going to be advised to keep those away from a meal, so that may impact your meal timing. A lot of times folks are taking those before bed. So understand this shouldn't override any individual plans or interventions that you're following with your healthcare team or health provider. But we want to think about meal timing as there's kind of different things we can do to play with here. So if someone's struggling to fall asleep, we may play with that evening meal and the composition of that in terms of macronutrients like carbs, proteins, and fats. And then if someone really needs to work on their overall sleep quality, especially if there's maybe a more insulin resistant individual. We may employ like a little bit of a cutoff in terms of that eating window. So meal timing is more individualized, but there's really three key points of research. One is the food before bed does seem to help with sleep latency, although it may not help sleep architecture. The other research we have is you can look at carbohydrate oxidation, or the carbs we burn over a 24-hour period may impact what's going on in terms of sleep quality. But you can pour through the research all day long. The end of the day, you have to find what works best for you. And sometimes that's just trying out. Maybe you have one dinner that you really like and you see kind of how that goes. You can always monitor this. We'll talk about sleep tracking in a little bit. Figuring out what's best for you, but it's important to know kind of those toggles that you have at your disposal in terms of improving overall sleep. Part 4 is technology, and not just because of what most people talk about, which is blue light. And I do have some more content coming out on blue light and blue light blocking in the future. But as far as this aspect of technology, what we have to think about is what type of content are we consuming, whether it's a exhilarating movie with your favorite actor and it's action packed, or your social media is like riddled with internet arguments nowadays, very controversial stuff. You can end up down a rabbit hole. So technology is not only the light itself, but the nature of the activity. Same thing with we talked a little bit about those stressful texts and emails earlier. We don't necessarily want to be engaging in those types of conversations right before bed. So technology, there's sort of a multifaceted reason we need to consider this is not just the device itself, but also the nature of what we're viewing on the device. Can be really good if you're someone who enjoys like old-fashioned book or something, getting off of technology, or can be a great time like if you've got family members, pets, anything like that, spending time and unplugging away from technology is probably going to be your best bet. If you are on technology, some of the Apple products have a night shift option. You can invest in some blue light glasses. There's some conflicting evidence on those in terms of efficacy with things like eye strain and other components of it, which I'm going to do a full deep dive on that, kind of more of a biohacking centered content piece. And with technology, we can also look at, there's different softwares you can install on your computer. There's a few different brands. I'm not affiliated with any of them, but if you research, like blue light software for laptop or something, I'm sure it'll pop up for you. Just know that those exist and they're available, but I would still consider, what is it that I'm consuming? What am I reading? What am I engaged in? Because that's going to influence what's going on. Just in terms of an alertness perspective, right? If you're super, if it's stressful content, you're wound up, or even if it's a good thing, maybe you just get super sucked into like a Netflix show, but that is going to impact your sleep overall because it's, stimulating your brain. Part 5 is caffeine timing, and this is a super underrated one. Stephen and I actually have a friend who may abuse part 5, but somehow she lives to tell the tale. I'm not sure if Stephen's still with us, but he can give me a thumbs up later on. Part 5 is caffeine timing. And we have to think about a caffeine cutoff, because caffeine actually has a half-life, meaning if you were to consume 200 milligrams of caffeine, you're still actually going to have some of that caffeine in your system. So I typically, when I've worked with clients over the years, we implement a caffeine cutoff working backwards from their desired bedtime. So if someone is trying to go to bed at 10 p.m., we're going to figure out, okay, what part of the early afternoon should we be cutting off caffeine? In a perfect world, maybe it's closer to lunch. This is where people can get into trouble. They're having very, very highly caffeinated pre-workouts and pre-workout supplements right as they get off work, maybe in the evening, and then they're going to train, and then they have a hard time with sleep. Also going to influence their body temperature as well, which was part 1 that we talked about. So also in terms of part 1, because I did briefly miss this one, there are devices. So whether it's, I'm not affiliated with any of these companies, there are cooling mattress pads you can get, or mattresses that will cool the surface beneath you. So if you struggle with this and you're like, Sam, I'm already cranking the AC, what else can I do? I would look at the material, the fabric that you're using in your sheets, clothing or lack of clothing. And then I'd also look at potentially something that goes underneath you to keep that mattress cooler. There's some research in part 1 there's not a ton of human evidence on those cooling mattress pads other than a group study on, I believe it was actually for menopausal women, and looking at how the cooling mattress pad may impact them. I don't want to misspeak on that. I'm not 100% certain, but I think there's one piece of research on that. Hopefully we'll see more over time in terms of how that cooling technology may impact the sleep for us as far as our health goes. Caffeine timing, biggest thing is deploying a caffeine cutoff. I would try to shoot for a minimum of a cutoff of at least 6 to 8 hours, if not more. If you can do more than that, like a 10-hour cutoff, that's fantastic. The biggest mistake I see is people, maybe reach for that extra cup of coffee or that energy drink. And it's not so much the fact that they just had caffeine, it's the timing of the caffeine and the cumulative dosing of the caffeine across the day. So we do want to look at, okay, am I having my morning coffee, or am I having an energy drink or something, and then I'm consuming more caffeine on top of that? I would certainly look at looking at that overall dose and working backwards. Someone who has a bedtime of 9 p.m. versus 11 p.m., or maybe go to bed earlier or later, you're going to have different caffeine cutoffs. So I just suggest working backwards from that and knowing people can metabolize caffeine a little bit differently. As far as, I believe there's like a genetic component to that, so can contribute there from as far as that caffeine clearance and just how they feel as far as if they can fall asleep right away or not. Some people also will have that caffeine in their system, and even if they don't actually, even if they have that caffeine in their system, basically it's still going to impact their sleep architecture, even if they are able to fall asleep. Nutrition, I kind of already hit on this one when I was talking about meal timing. So I hit these 3 bullets or 4 bullets already, so I'm not going to overemphasize that slide. Want to make sure we talk supplements and then go straight into questions. Some of our bonus tools here, I would say you can try these personally and kind of figure out what's best for you, or talk to your patient care coordinator. Magnesium, great quality magnesium is like magnesium glycinate, glycine, theanine, vitamin B6, adaptogens, and then there's this cool herb called rutacarpine, or Avodia rutacarpa, which actually helps you to clear that caffeine out of your system. Super cool from a sleep supplement perspective. Not an exhaustive list, but you can play around with stacking some of these. Magnesium, glycine, and theanine are usually pretty safe ones. I like some of these adaptogens depending on the client. And then you will find this vitamin in a good B complex, but typically you'll see B6 in isolation with like zinc and magnesium in a nighttime sleep stack. So definitely talk with your health provider as far as what's going to be best for you, but there's some evidence to support these different ingredients. Specifically, I'd say the top 3 especially can be very helpful, something I've personally implemented. And then these other ones down towards the bottom are just kind of cool overall, where adaptogens would come in as just circadian rhythm. So talked about our 5 tools. I want to leave time for questions. Last note is just most consumer sleep tracking devices could benefit to improve in accuracy. I'd say as of right now, sleep stage tracking is inconsistent, maybe inaccurate, but things like sleep latency and total duration and time in bed could be accurate. Oura Ring and Whoop are probably your best bet right now, with Oura Ring probably having a slight advantage, but those 2 are probably going to be superior to anything like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit. So just know for tracking sleep, that's probably the way to go from a wearable technology perspective. Understand it's not perfect, but it gives you a little bit of data. We're going to wrap up with some Q&A, and then I'll kind of give you guys an opportunity to find more information if you like. We got about 15 questions here. So Stephen, I was just going to start running through them like
rapid. That'd be great. Yeah, if you want to blast through.
Also, guys, just to be fair to everyone, there are some folks who asked multiple questions. I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to get their question answered. So if you see me maybe jump around, it's because I'm trying to include multiple names. So for Ian and a few of these other folks, just trying to do that. Stephen, you may be able to help the anonymous attendee who talked about anyone at Merrick who helps with insomniacs. So anonymous attendee asked, does elevated reverse T3 go away? If you can, if you stop chronic dieting and you lessen inflammation, improve gut health, or improve sleep, there are a lot of things that we can do to improve reverse T3 and basically get that free T3 up. Michael Rodriguez, I'm going to answer this live. What can you What can you take that would give you energy that wouldn't affect your sleep? So you could use maybe potentially a non-stimulant pre-workout or something with a nootropic formulation, or look to supplement adaptogens like rhodiola earlier in the day or midday. And you can still use some caffeine or maybe even like a teacrine earlier, but just make sure you're cutting it off. Ideally, if someone's struggling with their sleep, I like to move the workout time. So that's one way we can address that too, where if you like to have caffeine prior to your workout, we kind of move that, or we use a non-stimulant formulation, which certainly, like if you are a client of Merrick, you could certainly talk with your PCC about what might work best for you. Jeremy said hot yoga or sauna usage. I'm a big fan of that for stress reduction overall and as a stress management practice, and just the cardiovascular benefits of sauna. So I certainly think you could incorporate it in your regular routine. Hot yoga, depending on the intensity and how high your body temperature is, as long as you can cool down for sleep, you'll probably be okay. But I do like it just as far as stress modulation and getting your mind out of rumination mode, but make sure you have the opportunity to cool down. I've seen folks doing hot yoga, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, things like that, where your body temperature stays very elevated. It can be hard to fall back asleep. Maybe hot yoga a little bit earlier and still get some benefits there. Which would be better, topical or oral magnesium? I would say most of the research supports, I'm going to answer this live for Michael, things like magnesium glycinate, magnesium dimalate, depending if you're constipated and have poor magnesium status, magnesium citrate could be helpful as well. Gustavo says, what about the Garmin Venue Plus for sleep tracking? How would you rate its effectiveness? As of right now, I have nothing against Garmin, and I have no affiliation with any of these other companies. I haven't seen it be as accurate in terms of data. And then in terms of the various devices that are out, I kind of listed the two that are probably your best bets. And still, we're probably mostly looking at sleep latency, or like the onset of sleep, and then our overall time in bed, not exact data on the sleep stages. We're probably looking more at patterns and trends versus acute absolute data. Gustavo, I may come back to your ashwagandha question. Joshua said, what is a better novel effect from beginning TRT, losing fat or building muscle in the first 12 weeks, which is better to take advantage of the boost in androgens? This is probably going to depend on your current body composition and your diet prior to coming to Merrick. So if you had a higher level body fat percentage and you started exercising and you're employing TRT, you may see some improvements in your body fat percentage. Your nutrition is also going to be a key driver for this, whether you're in a calorie deficit or a calorie surplus. So really, you could decide how you want to steer things. I do think if you're not in a place of optimal body fat percentage, or you feel that you do have body fat to lose, it could be wise to maybe eat at maintenance or just slightly below, deploy the testosterone. As far as what's best for you in your situation, talking to your PCC and your doctor, because there may be a situation where, you have a particular body fat level, diet history, nutrition that's going to play into that. So there's not really a better effect. I think you can build muscle or lose fat with your HRT regimen. It's just figuring out where you're steering your nutrition and training to support that goal overall. What the hormone optimization is doing is giving you a really stable platform to work off of in terms of whatever goals that you have, because you're now optimized instead of that. Just be careful with how many variables you change, because when you're first kind of achieving this new optimized level with your treatment, you don't want to have so many variables with your nutrition and training. Ideally, you pick a routine, and then you're working with your doctor and your PCC to optimize your testosterone. Just scroll back up to the top. Anonymous attendee says, does melatonin negatively affect sleep? Not necessarily. Melatonin is actually a hormone that is produced naturally in our bodies. So the scientific term for that would be endogenous hormone production. And melatonin is produced by the pineal gland, and it plays a really important part of in our circadian rhythm. It's also a really powerful antioxidant. So melatonin technically does not negatively affect sleep. It's actually a hormone that's very important for sleep and circadian rhythm. I'm assuming you're referring to the supplement. It wouldn't be the first supplement that I would take to support sleep. I'd also look at health behaviors first before diving into melatonin. And I'd look at your micronutrient status and doing some of the tools we talked about, light exposure, going for walks, looking at your meals, cool, dark room, maybe even an eye mask or earplugs, depending on your environment. If like you're in a city, earplugs can be helpful to block out background noise, maybe a white noise machine if you need it. So melatonin wouldn't be my first thing, but it can be very helpful for people who suffer from jet lag and circadian disruption, or we need to kind of reestablish that healthy circadian rhythm. So I'm not against it. It's just not the lowest hanging fruit for most people. But there is evidence to support using melatonin. Gustavo said, can I take ashwagandha in the morning? So what's kind of cool about ashwagandha is there's a number of different formats like KSM 66, Nuganda, Sensoral Ashwagandha, Shodan Ashwagandha, and different folks may report different benefits across the board. For some of these adaptogens, it's more so just taking it consistently, but there are some forms like Sensoral, and I believe Nuganda may fall into here as well, that may be more sleep supportive or restorative, whereas something like KSM 66, you could kind of take just regularly, but you need to figure out too what you feel when you take the supplements. So some people report really not feeling much in an acute setting. It's more the long-term repeated use of ashwagandha. If you're looking for an adaptogen to take in the morning, there's a lot of evidence to support rhodiola for reducing fatigue and helping with endurance and really serving as that adaptogen too. And it does help with exercise performance, fatigue, and sleep deprivation. So you could look at rhodiola in the morning, and then ashwagandha you could kind of play around with as far as when it's best for you, and then maybe trying some different supplements that have the different patented ingredients in the clinically effective dose that, you know, kind of help you accomplish whatever it is you're trying to do. So ashwagandha is sometimes included with things like theanine, phosphatidylserine, glycine, magnesium in sleep products, but it may be a specific type of standardized extract that they're using there. All of those biomarker charts in the early part of the presentation perfectly explain everything I'm experiencing. I'm looking forward to my labs coming back. I do wear an Oura ring and I love it. I came to this presentation because sleep is my #1 issue. Well, I love that. I do think your labs are going to be really great for identifying some low-hanging fruit for you, especially if it's anything related to blood sugar, glycemic control, like we talked about, and how that plays in, identifying inflammation. So definitely really cool. Labs is it's like getting this really awesome blueprint on our current health, our metabolism, and what we need to do as far as getting that optimized. So really excited for you to see your labs and be able to go through that with the team. John Montgomery says, have you had people who have had problems with sleep that were related to mold, poor airflow, and AC ducts, et cetera? So mold is problematic because it's an environmental toxin and it will impact both your inflammation in your body and immune system. So mold over time does have consequences, and people do sometimes suffer, if it's an extreme case, from something called mold illness or mycotoxicity. So I would definitely, one of the easiest ways to test this, honestly, is leave the environment for a few days and see if you feel less fatigued, you feel less tired, your symptoms improve. Mold symptoms sometimes heavily overlap with other conditions and disease states. And you can also do some testing for this too. There's functional medicine testing that can be used to look at symptoms of mold and mycotoxicity. So it certainly can impact sleep, because anytime we have elevated body burden, right, we're kind of, think of it as just like a stress for the body. So anytime we're putting our body under that, and we have potentially things going on with the HPA axis, inflammation, and immune system, there are consequences. So I would do whatever you can to optimize airflow. But if you suspect mold, if it's a rental property, I would talk to your landlord about getting that fixed for you or providing alternative accommodations. If it's your home, there are various testing companies, not affiliated with any of them, that will come out and do an environmental screening and identify if there's mold in your home, which can be important for getting that straightened out. Is it
Let's do 2 more, Sam.
2 more? Okay, cool. Jeremy Tan, are there companies who do customized formulations for sleep supplements? What is your take on HMO prebiotics for sleep? I would have to get back to you on the prebiotics for sleep. I know there are specific strains that are being researched for a variety of different purposes, but that's not something I'm as familiar with right now. I could probably do a little digging. Are there companies who do customized formulations for sleep supplements? I know there are places where you can pick and choose stacks. I think right now, customized nootropic formulations are a lot more common than sleep. And I think you could save a lot of money and probably get a way better value by customizing your own formulation. Not, I don't have anything against anyone who does that, but some of the products we listed today, just in basic dosages, like whether it's 200 to 400 milligrams of magnesium. And actually, when you start with Merrick, your patient care coordinator provides you with a list of micronutrient targets that you can use in Chronometer. So if you're not maxing out your magnesium and stuff, that's going to be like first step. Then I would look at things like glycine and theanine that we talked about earlier. Probably a minimum of 3 grams of glycine, and theanine usually will come in capsules, either 100, 200, or 300 milligrams. Usually I'd say 100 and 200 milligrams of theanine is probably most popular. So try to play with it yourself first, because the problem with those customized formulations is you can't change the doses of those ingredients. I'll do one more. Cameron, any sleep supplements or suggestions to adjust your sleep schedule when changing times? I love this question. Also, any night shift workers here, this presentation is going to be super important for you guys too. Okay, so Cameron says, any supplements or suggestions to adjust your sleep schedule? Definitely light exposure in the morning for sure. Supplement wise, you could deploy melatonin in this instance. I think I do still like those baseline formulations that we talked about. And one thing that I think people do themselves an injustice when traveling is they'll shift their caffeine timing. And also a lot of times when people travel for work or they travel for social reasons or vacation, we start including things like maybe alcohol that's influencing our body temperature, which is then influencing our sleep. So I try to reverse engineer with folks what's changing in their day-to-day lives when they do travel for work or when they do go on vacation. And is there anything we can do as far as low-hanging fruit? That's not to say that folks can never enjoy themselves on a vacation or that they can't do things on a work trip. It's just we want to kind of pick and choose our battles of what's going to be best for the person. So melatonin could work here, or any of the other supplements that we talked about. But I would also be mindful of things like light exposure and having that cool, dark room to sleep as well. Go for a walk in the morning for sure. Definitely helps. And exercise. Exercise can definitely help with circadian rhythm and kind of getting that solid anchor there too. I think there was either a wrestler or an actor. Someone used to travel all the time. I remember there was a popular interview on this, and they're kind of in the fitness industry as well. They used to always just like ride a recumbent bike when they'd get off the plane, but then they would also kind of do those basic morning habits that we're talking about and those sleep habits. So hopefully that helps, Cameron. I'm sure your PCC or the Merrick team can definitely help you out with that too, if you're someone who travels a lot while in your day-to-day routine. But that should be, I think that was the last one you want me to do, Stephen.
Yeah, that's great. Sam, thank you so much. You blasted through 15 questions, and thanks for putting together that presentation for all Merrick. Merrick team members are on here, Merrick fans, people that are participants and clients of Merrick. So again, this is just a huge extra added value to our community, and we're just really happy to have you. And I really appreciate you taking the time tonight to join us for the time being.
Appreciate it, Stephen. Thanks for having me, man.
Awesome. This will be we'll be clipping this up and share on social media. But thanks again, everybody. Have a great night. Bye.